Tom Reynolds, a seasoned lifeguard, stood watch over the crowded beach, his eyes always on the horizon, vigilant for any sign of danger. The sun blazed overhead, casting a shimmering light across the waves that lapped at the shore. Families splashed in the shallows, children's laughter mixing with the sound of the surf. But amid the idyllic scene, a sudden scream of terror shattered the tranquility. Without hesitation, Tom's trained instincts kicked in, and he bolted toward the water, his heart pounding as he scanned the waves for the source of the cry. In the distance, Tom spotted a small figure, her tiny arms flailing against the relentless pull of the current. It was a little girl, no more than 6 years old, being dragged farther out to sea. The panic in her eyes was unmistakable even from the shore, and Tom knew he had to act fast. Every second counted in a situation like this. With a deep breath, he dove into the ocean, his powerful strokes cutting through the water as he raced against time. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. This was what he was trained for. As he swam closer, the waves grew more ferocious, crashing over him and threatening to push him back. But Tom's determination only hardened. He could see the girl's face now, her pale complexion stark against the darkening water, her mouth opening and closing as she fought for breath. Reaching her just as another wave threatened to engulf them both, Tom wrapped his arms securely around her. She was trembling, her small body cold and limp in his grasp, but he held on tight, whispering reassurances as he turned to face the shore. The swim back felt like an eternity. Each wave seemed more determined to pull them under, but Tom kept his focus, pushing forward with every ounce of strength he had. The beach seemed impossibly far away, a distant blur of sand and safety, but he could hear the distant cries of the onlookers, their voices blending into a desperate plea for their safe return. The girl clung to him, her fear palpable, her grip on his neck tightening as they battled the ocean together. Tom's muscles screamed in protest, but he couldn't let go. He wouldn't. Finally, they reached the shallows, and Tom felt the sand beneath his feet. A wave of relief washed over him as he staggered onto the beach, the weight of the child still in his arms. The crowd that had gathered erupted into applause, their cheers ringing in his ears as he carefully set the girl down on the sand. She was coughing, water sputtering from her lips, but she was alive. She was safe. Tom knelt beside her, brushing the wet hair from her face, his heart still racing from the adrenaline of the rescue. As he gazed down at the child, something caught his eye, something that made his breath hitch in his throat. There, on her tiny wrist, was a delicate bracelet, the silver chain glinting in the sunlight. His mind raced as he recognized the intricate design, the small name engraved on the charm that dangled from it. Lily. The name echoed in his mind, bringing with it a rush of memories he had tried so hard to bury. Tom's hands trembled as he reached out, his fingers brushing against the bracelet as if to confirm that it was real. For a moment, the world around him faded away, the cheers of the crowd dimming to a distant hum. Tom was transported back to a different time, a different place, where that very same bracelet had adorned the wrist of his daughter, Lily. She had been just a little older than this girl when she had disappeared, swallowed by the sea in a tragic boating accident that had left him broken. The bracelet had been his last gift to her, a symbol of their bond, a connection that had been severed far too soon. Tom's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. This bracelet, this connection to his past, was now inexplicably here, on the wrist of a child he had never met. He felt a mix of emotions surge through him: disbelief, hope, and a deep, aching sadness. How could this be? Was it a cruel twist of fate, or something more? He looked into the girl's eyes, searching for answers, but all he found was her innocent confusion, her small frame still trembling from the ordeal. "Where did you get this?" Tom asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The girl blinked up at him, still disoriented, and then glanced down at the bracelet. "My mom gave it to me," she said, her voice soft and shaky. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, as Tom's mind raced with possibilities. Who was this child? And how had she come to possess something so precious, something he had believed was lost forever? The answers seemed just out of reach, tantalizingly close yet maddeningly elusive. As the crowd began to disperse, Tom remained kneeling beside the girl, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and heartache. The bracelet felt like a ghost from his past, a piece of his life that he had never expected to see again. And yet, here it was, on the wrist of a child he had just saved from the very ocean that had taken his own daughter. It was as if the universe was playing some kind of cruel joke, or perhaps offering him a chance at closure. But Tom wasn't sure if he was ready for the answers he might find. As Tom helped the little girl, Emma, to her feet, his mind couldn't shake the image of that bracelet. The name, Lily, engraved on it was like a knife twisting in his heart, reopening wounds he had thought were long buried. His hands were steady as he checked her for injuries, but inside, his emotions were in turmoil. Each glance at the bracelet brought back memories of his own daughter, the one he had lost to the unforgiving sea. Lily had been his world, and the pain of her loss had never truly faded. Now, that pain was flooding back, sharp and fresh, as if no time had passed at all. Emma clung to his hand, her small fingers wrapped around his as if seeking comfort. She was still trembling, her wide eyes reflecting the lingering fear of her near-drowning experience. Tom tried to offer her a reassuring smile, but the sight of the bracelet made it difficult. The intricate design, the delicate engraving, it was exactly as he remembered. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing with questions that demanded answers. How could this child, this stranger, be wearing something so intimately connected to his past? "Where did you get this bracelet?" Tom asked, his voice gentle but filled with an urgency he couldn't quite hide. Emma looked up at him, her eyes still wet with tears. "It was a gift from my mom," she replied softly, her voice tinged with the innocence of youth. The simplicity of her answer only deepened Tom's confusion. He wanted to ask more, to press for details, but he hesitated. This was a child, after all, and she had just been through a terrifying ordeal. Bombarding her with questions seemed unfair, yet he couldn't let go of the need to understand. As they walked toward the first aid station, Tom's thoughts were consumed by memories of Lily. He remembered the day he had given her that bracelet, a simple but meaningful gift for her 8th birthday. She had worn it every day, treasuring it as a symbol of their bond. The last time he saw it was the day she disappeared, lost somewhere in the cold depths of the ocean. The grief of losing her had nearly destroyed him, and the bracelet had been one of the few tangible reminders of the life they had shared. Now, seeing it again on the wrist of another child, the grief came rushing back with a force that took his breath away. Emma noticed his silence and gave his hand a small squeeze. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and filled with concern. Tom looked down at her, startled by the question. He was supposed to be the one comforting her, not the other way around. But the sincerity in her eyes, the way she seemed to sense his inner turmoil, caught him off guard. "I'm fine," he lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a little surprised, that's all." He didn't want to burden her with his pain, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than just a coincidence. They reached the first aid station, and Tom knelt down to Emma's level, gently brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You're a brave girl," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad you're okay." Emma smiled at him, a shy, grateful smile that tugged at his heartstrings. But as he looked at her, All he could see was the bracelet, the one connection he had to a past that still haunted him. The urge to know more, to understand how this child came to possess such a meaningful item, grew stronger with each passing moment. The arrival of Emma's mother interrupted his thoughts. Sarah came rushing over, her face a mix of relief and anxiety as she embraced her daughter. Tom stepped back, giving them space, but his eyes never left the bracelet. When Sarah finally noticed him, she offered a tearful, heartfelt thank you, her gratitude evident in every word. Tom nodded, accepting her thanks, but his mind was elsewhere. He had to know more. This wasn't just a simple rescue. It was a thread leading back to the most painful chapter of his life, and he couldn't just let it go. Before he could stop himself, Tom pointed to the bracelet. "Where did Emma get this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah looked at the bracelet, then back at Tom, her expression shifting from relief to confusion. "I bought it for her," she said slowly. "I found it in an antique shop a few years ago. It seemed special, so I got it for her birthday." Her words hung in the air, laden with unspoken questions. Tom felt his heart sink further. The bracelet's journey from his daughter to this child was a mystery, one that was now intertwined with his unresolved grief. Tom's thoughts raced as he tried to process this information. An antique shop? How did something so precious, something that should have been lost at sea, end up in a store? It didn't make sense. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became to find out the truth. But where would he even begin? He had spent years trying to move on from the tragedy, and now, with a single piece of jewelry, it all came crashing back. The wound that had never fully healed was ripped open once more, and Tom knew he couldn't rest until he had answers. As Sarah comforted Emma, Tom stood there, lost in a sea of emotions. The pain, the confusion, and the haunting memories all swirled together, leaving him feeling more alone than ever. He glanced at the ocean, the same ocean that had taken Lily from him, and a cold determination settled in his chest. He had to find out how the bracelet ended up here, on this beach, with this child. It was more than just a coincidence. It was a connection to a past that refused to stay buried. And Tom knew that until he uncovered the truth, he would never find peace. As the initial shock began to settle, Tom found himself standing beside Sarah, Emma's mother, who had just arrived on the scene, her face pale with fear and relief. Emma was safe, but the atmosphere between them was thick with unspoken tension. Sarah's eyes darted to the bracelet on Emma's wrist, and Tom noticed her sudden intake of breath, as if she, too, recognized something unsettling about it. The connection between them, forged in that moment of shared recognition, was as palpable as the cool breeze coming off the ocean. "Where did you say you got the bracelet?" Tom asked again, his voice betraying a mix of curiosity and unease. Sarah hesitated, her gaze fixed on the delicate chain encircling her daughter's wrist. "I bought it from an antique shop a few years ago," she repeated, but now her voice carried a note of uncertainty. It was clear she was grappling with the same questions that haunted Tom. "There was something about it. I felt drawn to it, like it was meant for us, though I didn't know why." Her words hung in the air, and Tom felt a shiver run down his spine. The coincidence seemed too profound to be random. Tom's mind raced as he listened to Sarah's explanation. The bracelet, with its delicate engraving of the name Lily, had been a cherished possession of his daughter. The very idea that it could have been sold in an antique shop and then purchased by a complete stranger felt surreal. But Sarah's story only deepened the mystery. What was it about the bracelet that had called out to her? And how had it ended up in that shop, far from the place where Lily was lost? Tom could see the confusion in Sarah's eyes, mirroring his own turmoil. They were both searching for answers, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. As they spoke, Tom felt a growing connection to Sarah. one born out of shared pain and a mutual need for understanding. They were strangers, yet this inexplicable bond tied them together. My daughter, Lily, she disappeared years ago, Tom began, his voice faltering slightly as he forced the words out. This bracelet was hers. I gave it to her for her birthday. Seeing it now on Emma, it's like a piece of her has come back, but I don't understand how. The revelation hit Sarah hard, and she looked at Tom with wide, disbelieving eyes. The weight of his words settled between them, thick with emotion. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the bracelet, her fingers tracing the engraved name. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I had no idea. I just thought it was beautiful, and something about it felt comforting. I never imagined it could have belonged to someone else, someone important." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, but it did little to ease the tension that had taken root in Tom's chest. This wasn't just about a lost object. It was about a connection to a life that had been torn apart. And now, that connection was reawakening old wounds that had never fully healed. For a moment, they stood in silence, the only sound the distant crash of the waves. Tom's thoughts were a whirlwind of grief and confusion, but also a strange sense of fate. Was there a reason this bracelet had found its way to Emma? Was this the universe's way of giving him a chance to find closure? Or was it simply a cruel twist of fate, a reminder of the loss he could never escape? He didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at him, pushing him to seek answers, even if they might lead to more pain. Sarah's expression shifted from sorrow to resolve, and she met Tom's gaze with a newfound determination. "I want to help you find out how this happened," she said firmly. "If there's even a chance that this bracelet can lead to answers about your daughter, then we have to follow it. Emma and I will do whatever it takes to help you." Her offer was genuine, and Tom could see the sincerity in her eyes. She understood, on some level, what this meant to him, and she was willing to stand by his side as they unraveled the mystery together. Tom felt a surge of gratitude, mixed with apprehension. He had been alone in his grief for so long, and now, here was someone offering to share the burden. But this was also about Emma, a child who had no part in the tragedy that had befallen his family. He looked at the little girl, who was watching them with wide, curious eyes, oblivious to the emotional storm raging around her. Tom knew that whatever they uncovered, it would affect them all. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the answers they might find, but he couldn't ignore the pull of the past any longer. With a deep breath, Tom nodded, accepting Sarah's offer. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what we'll find, but I can't do this alone. If you're willing to help, then we'll do it together." The decision was made, and with it came a sense of finality. The journey they were about to embark on was fraught with uncertainty, but it was a path they needed to take. The bracelet had brought them together, and now it was leading them into the unknown. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as a team, bound by a shared need for closure and understanding. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the beach, Tom and Sarah found themselves sitting together, the ocean's rhythmic lull providing a somber backdrop to their conversation. The day's events had left them both emotionally drained, but neither could ignore the inexplicable connection they now shared. It was more than just the bracelet. It was the weight of their pasts, the unspoken pain that lingered between them. They were strangers, yet in each other's company, they found a comfort that neither had felt in years. Tom's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the last rays of sunlight were slowly fading. He took a deep breath, knowing that the conversation ahead would be painful but necessary. "Lily was my daughter," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was 8 years old when we lost her. It was supposed to be a fun day on the water, but everything went wrong so quickly. One minute she was laughing, and the next, She was gone. His words faltered, choked by the memories that surged forward, unbidden. The pain of that day, the helplessness he had felt, was something he had never been able to fully articulate. Sarah listened, her heart aching for the man beside her. She could see the anguish etched on his face, the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. She reached out, placing a comforting hand on his arm, silently encouraging him to continue. "We searched for days," Tom went on, his voice thick with emotion. "The Coast Guard, volunteers, everyone did their best, but the sea had taken her. All we found were a few of her belongings, washed ashore. The bracelet was one of them, or at least it should have been. I don't know how it ended up with you, but seeing it again, it's like reopening a wound I thought had finally started to heal." The silence that followed was heavy with shared grief. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she imagined the depth of Tom's loss, the crushing weight of having to go on without his child. "I can't imagine what you've been through," she said softly, her voice trembling with empathy. "I've had my own struggles, but nothing like that. I've always been afraid of losing Emma, especially after her father left us. She's all I have, and the thought of something happening to her." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The fear she felt as a mother was something she carried with her every day, a constant shadow that loomed over her love for her daughter. Tom turned to look at her, surprised by the raw emotion in her voice. "You've been through a lot too," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Losing a partner, raising a child on your own, that's not easy. And now, with this bracelet, I don't know why it ended up with you, but maybe it's brought us together for a reason." The words felt strange on his lips, but they resonated with a truth he couldn't ignore. There was a sense of fate in their meeting, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together at this exact moment, for reasons neither of them fully understood. Sarah nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I've always believed that things happen for a reason, even if we don't understand them at the time. Maybe this is one of those times. Maybe we're meant to help each other, to find some kind of closure." Her words were tentative, filled with the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could both find some peace through this unexpected connection. The idea of closure was something Tom had long since abandoned, but now, sitting here with Sarah, it didn't seem as impossible as it once had. As the night grew darker, their conversation deepened, moving beyond the surface of their pain to the roots of their fears and hopes. Tom spoke of his struggles to move on after Lily's death, the way he had thrown himself into his work to avoid dealing with the grief that consumed him. "I thought if I just kept busy, I wouldn't have to feel it," he admitted, his voice filled with a quiet resignation. "But grief doesn't work that way. It just waits for you, biding its time until you're alone with your thoughts. That's when it hits the hardest." Sarah could relate to that. She had her own ways of coping with loneliness, with the constant pressure of being a single parent. "I tried to be strong for Emma," she said, her voice low. "But there were nights when I'd just sit by her bed, watching her sleep, terrified that something would happen to her. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't enough, that I'd fail her somehow. But we got through it, day by day." Her voice wavered as she spoke, but there was a strength beneath the vulnerability, a testament to the resilience she had developed over the years. In that shared space of vulnerability, they found solace in each other's presence. The pain of the past didn't disappear, but it became more bearable, softened by the understanding and empathy they offered one another. The bracelet that had brought them together now seemed less like a symbol of loss and more like a bridge between their worlds, connecting two souls who had been adrift for too long. They didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, they didn't need them. All that mattered was that they weren't alone in their grief. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Tom and Sarah made an unspoken agreement to face whatever came next together. The journey ahead was uncertain, but they had already taken the first step by sharing their stories, by opening their hearts to the possibility of healing. The past had left its mark on both of them, but maybe, just maybe, the future held the promise of something more. They sat in silence, side by side, gazing out at the endless ocean, each lost in their own thoughts, but no longer feeling so alone. The morning after their emotional conversation, Tom and Sarah met at a small cafe near the beach, determined to begin their search for answers. The night's reflections had only strengthened their resolve to uncover the truth behind the mysterious bracelet. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a link to the past, to the people they had lost and the pain they had endured. They knew that finding the truth wouldn't be easy, but the need to understand how the bracelet had ended up with Emma drove them forward. As they sipped their coffee, the weight of their shared mission settled between them, a quiet determination in their eyes. Their first step was to visit the antique shop where Sarah had purchased the bracelet. The shop was tucked away on a quiet street, its windows filled with the trinkets and treasures of lives long past. As they entered, a bell above the door chimed softly, announcing their arrival. The shop was dimly lit, filled with the scent of aged wood and leather, and the shelves were cluttered with objects that seemed to whisper stories of forgotten times. Tom felt a strange mix of hope and dread as he followed Sarah inside, his heart pounding with anticipation. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a kind face and a keen eye, greeted them warmly. Sarah explained their purpose, her voice steady despite the emotions roiling beneath the surface. The shopkeeper listened attentively, his brow furrowing as she described the bracelet and the circumstances under which she had found it. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully and led them to a glass display case at the back of the store. Inside were several pieces of jewelry, each one carefully preserved and displayed. "This is where it was," he said, pointing to an empty spot on the velvet lining. "It came in with a batch of items from an estate sale, if I recall correctly." Tom leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the other items in the case. Each piece seemed to hold its own story, but none caught his attention like the missing bracelet. "Do you remember where the estate sale was?" he asked, his voice tinged with urgency. The shopkeeper frowned, shaking his head slowly. "It's been a few years," he admitted, "but I do remember that the items came from a house near the coast, not far from here. The family had lost someone in a boating accident. Tragic, really. I didn't ask too many questions, just bought the lot and put them up for sale." The words hit Tom like a punch to the gut. The coincidence was too great to ignore. Another family, another loss at sea. Could it be connected to Lily's disappearance? The possibility sent a chill down his spine. He exchanged a glance with Sarah, who looked equally shaken. "Do you have any records of the sale?" Sarah asked, her voice wavering slightly. The shopkeeper hesitated, then nodded. "I might have something in the back," he said, and disappeared through a curtain into a small office. Tom and Sarah waited in tense silence, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours. When the shopkeeper returned, he was holding a worn ledger, its pages yellowed with age. He flipped through it carefully, scanning the entries with a practiced eye. "Here it is," he said finally, tapping a page near the middle. "The sale was from the estate of a Mr. and Mrs. Jacobs. They lived in a small cottage by the sea. I don't remember much else, but if you're looking for more information, you might try speaking with their neighbors. They might remember something." He handed the ledger to Tom, who copied down the details, his hands trembling slightly. Armed with this new information, Tom and Sarah left the shop, their minds racing with possibilities. The name Jacobs didn't ring any bells, but the connection to the sea, to a boating accident, was too close to home. "What if this is it?" Sarah asked as they walked back to the car. "What if this leads us to the truth about Lily?" Tom didn't respond immediately, his thoughts too tangled to form a coherent answer. The hope that had flared within him was dangerous, threatening to unravel the fragile peace he had managed to build over the years. But he couldn't ignore it. He had to see this through. Their next stop was the address listed in the ledger, a small, weathered cottage perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The house looked abandoned, its paint peeling and windows boarded up, but there was a haunting beauty to it, as if it had once been filled with life and love. Tom felt a pang of sorrow as he approached the front door, imagining the family that had lived there, their lives cut short by tragedy. He knocked, but there was no answer, only the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. They were alone, the only signs of life the seagulls circling overhead. Determined not to give up, they began asking around the nearby houses, speaking with neighbors who had lived in the area for decades. Most of them remembered the Jacobs family, an older couple who had lived quietly, keeping to themselves. The wife had passed away several years before, and the husband had died not long after in a boating accident. The details were vague, but it was enough to deepen the mystery. Tom felt a growing sense of unease as they pieced together the fragments of the story. Could it be that Lily's bracelet had somehow found its way into the Jacobs' possession? And if so, how? As the day wore on, the trail grew colder. The neighbors' memories were hazy, the details lost to time. Tom felt the weight of disappointment pressing down on him, but Sarah refused to let him give up. "We're getting closer," she insisted, her eyes bright with determination. "There has to be something here, some clue we're missing." Her words reignited the spark of hope in Tom's chest, and together, they vowed to keep searching. The truth was out there, just beyond their grasp, and they wouldn't stop until they found it. After days of searching, Tom and Sarah finally received a breakthrough that neither of them had anticipated. It came in the form of a letter delivered by an elderly woman who had lived in the cottage next to the Jacobs for most of her life. She had heard of their inquiries and had been moved by their persistence. The letter was from Mr. Jacobs himself, written shortly before his death and addressed to his late wife. It had been found among his belongings, tucked away in a drawer, and the neighbor had kept it, unsure what to do with it until now. Tom held the letter in his hands, the paper yellowed with age, the handwriting shaky but legible. His heart raced as he unfolded it, Sarah standing beside him, her breath held in anticipation. The letter was brief but filled with emotion, a final confession from a man who had lived with guilt for far too long. As Tom read it aloud, the truth began to unravel, each word hitting them like a blow. Mr. Jacobs had been on the water the day Lily disappeared. He had seen the accident, but in his panic, he had done nothing to help. It was a secret he had carried to his grave, the weight of his inaction haunting him until the end. Tom's hands shook as he finished reading, the words blurring as tears filled his eyes. The revelation was more than he could bear. The knowledge that someone had been there, had seen his daughter's final moments, and had done nothing to save her. The pain that had simmered beneath the surface for years now erupted, a torrent of grief and anger that threatened to consume him. He turned away, unable to look at Sarah, the emotions too raw, too overwhelming. The truth they had sought was far worse than he had imagined, and it left him feeling more lost than ever. Sarah reached out, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, but Tom pulled away, the anguish in his heart too great to be soothed. "Why didn't he help her?" he whispered, his voice breaking. How could he just leave her there? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, the silence between them heavy with sorrow. Sarah didn't know what to say, how to make sense of the senseless tragedy that had befallen them both. She could see the pain etched on Tom's face, the way his body trembled with the force of his emotions. There was nothing she could do to take away his pain, but she could be there for him, offering silent support as he processed the devastating truth. The letter also revealed how the bracelet had come into Mr. Jacob's possession. After the accident, he had found it washed up on the shore, a silent reminder of the life he had failed to save. He had kept it, unable to bring himself to throw it away, but the guilt of what it represented had eaten away at him. In the end, he had placed it among his wife's belongings, hoping that, in death, they could both find some form of peace. The bracelet had eventually been sold with the rest of their estate, ending up in Sarah's hands, and now, inexplicably, it had led her and Tom to this moment of truth. The weight of the revelation pressed down on Tom, suffocating in its intensity. The bracelet, once a symbol of love and connection, now felt tainted by the knowledge of Mr. Jacob's inaction. It was a tangible reminder of the day he lost Lily, of the pain that had defined his life ever since. And yet, despite the darkness of the revelation, Tom felt a strange sense of closure. He had spent years wondering what had happened to his daughter, imagining countless scenarios. But now he knew. The truth was painful, but it was also a release from the uncertainty that had plagued him for so long. Sarah, sensing the turmoil in Tom's heart, gently took the letter from his hands and folded it, placing it back in the envelope. "I'm so sorry, Tom," she said softly, her voice filled with compassion. "I can't imagine how much this hurts, but I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." Her words were a lifeline, grounding him in the present, reminding him that he wasn't alone. Despite the pain, Tom knew that Sarah's presence was a source of strength, a light in the darkness that threatened to overwhelm him. As the initial shock began to fade, Tom found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. The anger he felt toward Mr. Jacobs was intense, but so was the sorrow. He understood, on some level, the fear that had paralyzed the old man, the guilt that had driven him to keep the truth hidden. But understanding didn't make the pain any less real, nor did it erase the years of suffering that had followed. Tom knew that forgiveness was possible, but it would take time, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to let go of the anger just yet. In the days that followed, Tom and Sarah continued to process the revelation together. They spoke at length about what they had discovered, about the impact it had on them both. Tom found solace in Sarah's unwavering support, in the way she listened without judgment, offering comfort without trying to fix what was broken. Their bond, forged in the fires of shared grief, grew stronger with each passing day. The journey they had embarked on was painful, but it was also a path toward healing, one that they would walk together. As they stood on the cliff overlooking the sea, the place where Lily's life had ended and where their journey had begun, Tom felt a sense of resolution. The truth had been uncovered, the secrets laid bare, and though the pain remained, it was tempered by the knowledge that he was no longer alone. Sarah and Emma had become a part of his life, a new chapter in a story that had once seemed destined to end in despair. Together, they faced the future, the past no longer a burden but a part of the journey that had brought them here. In the weeks that followed the shocking revelation, Tom and Sarah slowly began to rebuild their lives, finding solace in each other's company as they navigated the aftermath of their discovery. The truth had been painful, more so than either of them had anticipated, but it had also brought a strange sense of closure. Tom no longer felt the weight of unanswered questions hanging over him. He knew what had happened to Lily, and while the pain of her loss remained, it was tempered by the knowledge that he could finally begin to heal. Sarah, too, found herself reflecting on the journey they had undertaken together. She had watched as Tom confronted the darkest parts of his past, his strength and vulnerability laid bare for her to see. It had deepened her respect and admiration for him, and as they spent more time together, those feelings grew into something more profound. There was a comfort in their shared experience, a bond that had been forged in pain but had blossomed into something beautiful. It wasn't just about the bracelet anymore. It was about the connection they had found in each other. Tom, for the first time in years, allowed himself to hope for a future that wasn't defined by loss. He began to spend more time with Sarah and Emma, finding joy in the small, everyday moments they shared. Whether it was a walk on the beach, a quiet dinner, or simply watching Emma play, Tom felt a warmth in his heart that he hadn't experienced since Lily's passing. The darkness that had once consumed him was gradually giving way to light, and he found himself looking forward to the days ahead with a sense of anticipation rather than dread. Emma, sensing the growing bond between her mother and Tom, welcomed him into their lives with open arms. She had always been a bright, joyful child, but now there was an added spark in her eyes whenever Tom was around. The three of them began to feel like a family, each bringing something unique to the relationship that made it stronger. Tom found himself drawn to Emma's innocence and laughter, her presence a reminder that life could still hold beauty and joy, even after all the pain he had endured. As the days turned into weeks, Tom and Sarah decided to take a trip together, a symbolic gesture of their new beginning. They returned to the place where they had first met, the beach where Tom had saved Emma's life. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with memories of that fateful day, but also with the promise of a future that they would build together. Standing on the shore, with the waves lapping at their feet, Tom felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He knew that this was where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. During their time away, Tom and Sarah had many deep conversations about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. They spoke openly about the challenges they had faced, the pain they had endured, and the strength they had found in each other. These conversations helped to solidify their bond, turning it into something that felt unbreakable. They both understood that life would never be without its challenges, but they were ready to face them together with a shared commitment to each other and to the life they wanted to build. When they returned from their trip, they decided to make things official. Tom moved into Sarah and Emma's home, and their lives became even more intertwined. It was a big step, one that came with its own set of challenges, but it felt right. The house, once filled with echoes of the past, was now brimming with the sounds of laughter and love. Tom found himself waking up each morning with a sense of purpose, eager to embrace the day and the new life he was creating with Sarah and Emma. The bracelet, which had once been a source of pain and mystery, now held a new significance in their lives. Tom no longer saw it as a reminder of what he had lost, but rather as a symbol of what he had found. It was a connection to Lily that he would always cherish, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become a bridge between the past and the future, a testament to the power of love, even in the face of loss. He kept the bracelet in a special place, not hidden away, but displayed as a reminder of the journey he had taken to get here. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. Tom and Sarah grew closer, their love deepening with each passing day. They supported each other through the ups and downs, finding strength in their partnership. Emma flourished in the new environment, her happiness a constant source of joy for both of them. The life they had built together was one of love, understanding, and hope, a stark contrast to the loneliness and grief that had once consumed them. They had found each other when they needed it most, and that connection had brought them back to life. In the quiet moments, when they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset, Tom would often think about Lily. He missed her every day, but he knew she would have wanted him to be happy, to find peace. And in Sarah and Emma, he had found exactly that. His heart, once broken and scarred, was healing, and he knew that the love they shared would continue to grow. They had all been through so much, but now they were ready to embrace the future together. As time passed, Tom often found himself reflecting on the events that had brought him to this point in his life. It was as if the universe had conspired to weave their paths together, bringing Sarah and Emma into his world at the exact moment he needed them most. The bracelet, once a symbol of loss and pain, had become the catalyst for a series of events that neither he nor Sarah could have ever predicted. In it, he saw the threads of destiny, delicate, fragile, yet incredibly powerful, binding them together in ways that defied explanation. Tom would sit quietly on the porch in the evenings, the cool breeze carrying the scent of the sea, and think about how much his life had changed. The grief that had once consumed him was still there, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had been transformed into something else, something that had given him the strength to move forward. He knew now that Lily's memory would always be a part of him, but it no longer held him back. Instead, it guided him, reminding him of the love that had brought him and Sarah together. Sarah, too, found herself pondering the strange twists of fate that had led them to each other. She had long believed that everything happened for a reason, but the events of the past few months had deepened that belief. The bracelet, the antique shop, the meeting on the beach. It all seemed too perfectly orchestrated to be mere coincidence. She often marveled at how something as simple as a piece of jewelry had set in motion a series of events that would change all their lives forever. It was as if the universe had a plan for them, one that they were only beginning to understand. Together, Tom and Sarah embraced the idea that destiny had played a role in their journey. It wasn't just about the past they had uncovered or the pain they had shared. It was about the future they were building. The love that had grown between them, the bond they had formed with Emma, all felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. They were no longer two people lost in their own worlds of grief and uncertainty. They were a family, united by a shared history and a shared hope for the future. Emma, with the innocence of a child, had been the one to bring them together. She had worn the bracelet without knowing its significance, yet it had been the key to unlocking a story that had remained hidden for so long. Tom and Sarah often wondered if there was more to her role in all of this, if perhaps she was the true embodiment of the destiny that had guided them. Her laughter, her joy, and her love were now the center of their world, a constant reminder that life, no matter how difficult, always offered new beginnings. As the days turned into years, the events that had once seemed so monumental gradually became part of their shared history. The bracelet was no longer a mystery to be solved, but a cherished keepsake, a symbol of the journey they had taken together. It hung in a place of honor in their home, a reminder of the love that had brought them together and the destiny that had guided them. Every time Tom looked at it, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the past, for the present, and for the future that stretched out before them. The story of the bracelet, of Lily, of the journey that had brought Tom and Sarah together, became a part of their family lore. They would tell it to Emma as she grew older, not as a tale of sorrow, but as one of hope and love. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always the possibility of light, that the threads of destiny, though sometimes invisible, were always there, guiding them toward the life they were meant to live. It was a story that would live on, passed down through the generations, a testament to the power of love and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As they looked toward the future, Tom and Sarah knew that they were ready to face whatever came their way. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and that alone gave them the courage to move forward. The pain of the past had been transformed into a foundation upon which they could build a new life, one filled with love, joy, and endless possibilities. They were no longer bound by the chains of grief, but were free to embrace the life they had always dreamed of. And so, they continued their journey, hand in hand, with the knowledge that destiny had brought them together for a reason. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew that whatever it was, they would face it together. The power of destiny had led them to this point, and it would continue to guide them, weaving their lives into a tapestry of love and hope that would endure for all time. As their story draws to a close, we're reminded that sometimes life has a way of bringing us exactly what we need when we least expect it. Tom and Sarah's journey shows us that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there is always hope, always the possibility of new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and share what this story meant to you. And if you'd like to support us in bringing more stories like this to life, consider buying us a coffee through the link in the pinned comment. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and we look forward to sharing more with you soon.